then I would remember that I had this experience, this sort of light of divinity in a way that was just walking with me, not telling me what to do, not requiring anything of me, just being with me. I felt very not alone because this experience had happened for me. And so, I say that the community were midwives, but it was really grief that birthed me into the person that I am today.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Hello, Pixie. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Kendra. So happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting to be here. So, I'm going to share just a little of how it is that we connected. So, I happened to receive your book from one of my closest friends as a gift when I started to do this podcast. She's like, "Oh, I have to send you this book that I know the author." And so she sent me and gifted me Prayers of Honoring Grief. And that is how I know of you, is through my friend Catalina. And so thank you, Cata, for connecting us. So I'll just kind of do that shout out to Cata. So I'm just so honored to have you here.
I'm really honored to be here. I always love talking about grief.
Well, you wrote about it. So I'm like, now I'm like even curious. Before we started recording, I was just telling Pixie, I'm like, I was just even rereading the introduction. And just in the introduction itself, there are amazing, I always say the word nuggets or little pieces of like wisdom that are like throughout every single paragraph of this introduction. So your insight on grief is definitely something that is very much alike to how I feel about grief. So I'm just excited about this conversation. So let's talk then about the different books you've written and when you started to write and all of that gist. And then we'll dive into this particular book.
Sounds good. Well, I began writing the Prayers of Honoring series in about 2014. It came out in 2015. It started as blog posts. And I sort of jumped around. In 2016, I wrote Prayers of Honoring Voice. And in 2017, I wrote Boundaries and Protection. And then in 2018, Prayers of Honoring Grief. And then dipped back in to Gold Mining the Shadows I think it came out in 2019. So I've been kind of birthing a book a year.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, it's like boop, boop, boop. And I love that what you're saying, birthing. I love that.
Hmm.
I love that concept of birthing. It's not about writing, it's born. It's
Yeah.
born every year.
Yeah. A seed gets sown, and then you have to decide, am I going to follow this energy and see what it has to teach me?
Love that. Now, which of these books, I this is gonna be a hard one, because I've been asked that even just about the podcast. Is there one of them that is more of that baby that you're like, wow, this is the one I was definitely meant to write because it's something I learned from it as I was writing?
They really are like children. Each of them has kind of their own personality. Boundaries and Protection has a mountain lion on the cover, so it's got a very feisty and fierce and kind of self-care, caretaking kind of personality. Prayers of Honor and Grief, just from the cover image alone, you can see that it's very this book is sort of like her own personality too. So she's sort of just sitting courageously with her feelings and all that has come to be, and trying to figure out how to be with grief every day and be with all of the other things, joy and pleasure and responsibility and these sorts of things. Prayers of Honoring Voice is a special book too, because, and this is the one that your dear friend Catalina Sanchez Frank just translated into Spanish, is very timely. So for our times, Prayers of Honoring Voice is really out there right now, because people are saying, I want to speak truth, and I need some confidence around my voice. I need to be courageous in the way that I speak. And Gold Mining the Shadows, similarly, is just a deep dive into how we can, in a very kind way, reparent ourselves for, kind of stripping away some of this colonial programming and some of this stuff that's been stuck on us for hundreds of years. Um, so every book kind of has its own sort of persona, and each one is sort of also like born out of the other, in that sort of, in keeping with that sibling theme. The first one sort of paved the way for the second one, and so they sort of all travel together, in a big conversation that covers a lot of really key topics for healing.
Yes, and talk about healing. And by the way, I've read the one in Spanish of the Oraciones de Veneración Voz, the voice one, since
Hmm.
I was able to read it before it came out in print and write my little review on your book in your book too. So that was exciting
So
as well.
grateful.
To have that. No, and the reading that, I also felt very identified. What you just said about when you read that, like you feel as if it's you that's writing it. It's as if I'm reading a journal entry of my own voice. Like it
Hmm.
really does feel that way in voice and in voice. Sorry, I'm saying voice because I
That's
have the book
okay.
in front of me.
That's what we
Um,
call it.
so this one, and as well as the grief one, are the two I have, also have worksheets and to be able to write your thoughts and even prompts for questions. And so
Hmm.
it's also a way of also not only just reading but really looking within, as a reader. So you mentioned something regarding they're part of this like healing journey. You in your bio, I was reading that you're a trained healer. So would you dive a little bit into that?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that about the journal prompts. The books are definitely built to be interactive, and they do kind of provide like a self inquiry. And also, grief and voice are written in first person, so you get
Mhm.
to kind of interact with it as if they are your own words. Prayers of Honoring is a little different. It's sort of more from a we perspective. My training as a healer started in, gosh, many, many, many years ago, 23 years or so ago. I trained as a body worker, in Los Angeles. And that led me through many different modalities of healing the body. And then that led me into examining a lot more. Being in my 20s and early 30s, I started to, enter that time in my life where I was doing healing on myself and my emotional body. And so I studied with various teachers, indigenous teachers, non-indigenous teachers, for the times. That was a little bit, now it's called sort of new age, and some of my trainings were of a shamanic nature, not training to be a shaman, but just to call in some of the transformative tools of utilizing some of our more indigenous gifts of imagination, of visualization, of meditation, of sitting practice, and things like that. So I received my, how do you call it? Like, I want to say well-rounded, but sort of like this very broad spectrum, conversation in healing over the course of about 20 or so years.
And I'm sure that's played a huge part as well then in your perspective when you're writing, because you already know the concepts of healing the body. And a huge part of being a well rounded, like you just even said, that is really the within, right? The emotions, the mental state is not just the outward, not just the outwardly affecting the inward, but also happens vice versa. That some our inward emotions can affect our outer, body as well. Correct?
Yes, it's just a long, a long experience of that builds a body of work. I'm very kind of caring to mention in the introductions of all of my books that, I don't have a degree in clinical psychology or anything like that. I just have my own lived experience with moving through some of these challenges and having also had the privilege of a lot of support around me, a lot of key players to help me understand what kinds of healing can actually do harm and what
Mm.
kind of healing creates space for the self to you know basically sort of forge their own path into being in their own body with not ease. Obviously these are not easeful times,
Well,
but
but yeah, but ease
to be
ease
accepting.
yeah, accept it. Yeah. The ease, I think it's also that aspect of just the flowing, of allowing it to just come out, right?
Yeah.
So some things can actually become blockages. And in this, what you've been able to experience and learn is ways of opening it in like you said, in a safe way of emotions to be able to kind of travel in a safe way, correct? Would that
Yes.
be the right way? Okay.
Yes, for the sole purpose of, being able to be in our bodies, be honest with ourselves, break some of the patterns of self-betrayal and you know, becoming very kind of shut down and frozen and things like that, which is sort of the conditions that we were hatched in here, especially in America, is one that causes us to kind of really compartmentalize the parts of ourselves that are aching for healing and just kind of narrowing ourselves into this, performative individuals that, show up like very good citizens, when in actuality there's so much more to us than that. And we feel that need for emotional healing knocking. And if we're not training ourselves or having the conversations with ourselves where we can be honest, then we just keep shelving it. But emotions like grief and sadness and guilt and shame, those things can really creep up on a life and diminish its quality and diminish the quality of relationships.
Yeah, because if you're just kind of bottling them in, which is one of the things you mentioned even in the book, we are so used to not allowing them to show, like these other emotions of joy and things like that are allowed, right? They're commonly known. You're okay to show you're happy. It's okay to
Mhm.
show, right? But then these
Sanctioned
other emotions,
emotions.
yeah, then there's some other emotions that are like put in this like back burner, like they're not okay. Yeah. What did you just call them? Sanctioned?
Sanctioned emotions, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And so let's talk now, go back to this aspect of grief. Give me 1 second. My dog is wanting to leave the bedroom, so I have to open. Oh, there. Okay, my husband just opened it for her. She likes to play give me company while I'm doing this, but then she decides to exit and then I have to get up from the from the desk to get up. So sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
Yeah, she's usually the one that interrupts my podcast because of that. So, yeah, so let's go into why then grief and your own journey, if you don't mind sharing whatever parts of grief you'd like to share in this podcast. Because
Yeah.
I can know you've lived grief, and you even say, "Oh, if you think that you haven't experienced grief, look around you." Like, where was it? Oh, nothing to grieve, have you? Look around. People are hurting everywhere. The earth is grieving the loss of her biodiversity. Humankind is becoming rapidly more unwell due to environmental pollution and economic inequality. Like, there are things that, whether we've experienced it ourselves or if we're just able to look around, we're going to have something to grieve about. So,
Yes.
what is your grief journey? Let's go there.
Yes, let's go there. Well, some of us also carry grief, for others, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, and it's probably more unconsciously than not, but just to look out on the earth and see trash or pollution or things like that. It hurts to, a feeling body is affected by that. And so, anytime we feel a sorrow, which is a daily thing around here, I guess, is to encounter grief. And so for me, I experienced routine grief, and I just wasn't calling it that until I had a second term miscarriage, second trimester. Sorry, am I saying that right? Second trimester. Yeah, second trimester miscarriage when I was 31. So in the early 2000s. And it just so happened that I experienced this loss while I was surrounded in a community that I had been part of for a couple of years. So I, it is as if I was able to grieve because I had support. Eh, Otherwise, before that, all of my grief, I think, was in a vacuum. And I could share grievances with friends and family and things like that. But I don't feel that I really got the opportunity to embody my grief, to have supporters around me who are wise to say, you are in a grieving process. So that was an all new language for me, just 20 years ago. And so what the unique thing that happened that I did not expect, I made time and space to grieve this particular loss, which is, this is a pregnancy loss or the loss of a child or even the loss of a parent. These are kind of like, um, you know, approved, allowed, um, examples of mourning, or situations in which our employers and things say, of course you lost your mother, I'm sending condolences, I'm so sorry. So there's sympathy around these kinds of losses. But what happened for me as I got my first permission in my life to grieve, was that every other grief that was significant for me that had happened up to that point came like little children, yes, banging on the mausoleum saying, "We want to be acknowledged too. We deserve space in here to be felt for the first time ever after decades of not being felt." And so I became very overwhelmed at that time with how many things. It almost became to the point, Kendra, where the loss of the pregnancy was number one, kind of a portal, a pathway into living with grief every day. Um, and it also the many griefs from childhood and other events that had happened began to almost eclipse the loss
Mm.
of this dream, of having this baby that wasn't going to get to be. It was sort of like
Cathartic. It was a
y-
cathartic experience. It seems really cathartic and cleansing to some extent. But what you're just saying about it kind of clouding, kind of like eclipsing that, even though
Mhm.
that was but it just kind of showed. I'm sure, I don't know if this is your perspective. In my perspective, I had a miscarriage as well. My first pregnancy was a miscarriage, but I feel that it, with what you're saying, it's as if it had to occur for you to be able to live all these other or um I don't want to say the word deal. What would be deal with? I don't like that. I don't like that. Be able to feel these other grief experiences you had. So it was a catalyst for that.
Yes, it was my initiation.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. So that was then that particular then instance. Yeah, because when I read this, and you talk about then the community. Sorry, I'm like retraining again my thought here because I'm looking at your book. I want to ask things here, but then I also want to ask things regarding the things you just said. You just mentioned the community you were in. What was different about this community that allowed you to be able to express your grief than what you had been brought up to then? What was unique about this community?
There were a few things that were unique. One is that I lived in a very small town that had about population 1,000. And so the people who I gathered with were consistent. There was some real family vibes with this in this place, and But probably the most significant thing about it is that up until that point, my peers had been mostly disconnected. They had all come together at my wedding, which is one reason, that we have weddings, is so we can have all of our support people around us at once. Although the custom itself is evolving. These women in particular that were around me were older than me. Some of them were as old as my parents, and others a little bit less so. But they had such a body of life experience that I didn't have. So they sort of took me under their wing. And while I recognize that was very unique to me, I'm realizing that today there are um, it's much more common today that we have a circle or a group of friends that we can share our hearts with, and I hope, my hope and my goal is that people build this and create this around them, a safe circle. um, and so that was very different for me, and so it really was kind of like going to birth my next self.
Mm.
Through this grief process, and that suddenly I had 5 or 6 very reliable and experienced midwives or doulas to be able to say, we've got you on this. And it was simple things too, Kendra. It wasn't like a large grief ceremony, wailing and veils and such. Although I have staged such things
Mhm.
since then. It was just permission to be where I was at. It was I was provided verbally and spatially with the space to process, to talk about it, to be stuck in it. Even, there was no judgment about, gosh, you have been talking about this loss or this pain for so long, when are you going to get over that? And this
Mhm.
is the kind of way that
Yeah.
it was growing up in my family. Move on, just stop
Mhm.
loitering in it. And so for the first time ever, I had permission to just be how I actually was, without having to, as women also, we're very surveilling of ourselves, always checking ourselves and watching ourselves so we're not disrupting anyone's peace in any way. And so this was a permission. Grief is messy. It's disruptive. You go ahead, you be in that space. We'll hold it around you. Meanwhile, we're going through all of our own things too, and we'll find common ground. But there was just a very sweet intersection of allowing me to be where I was at. And that
Mm.
sounds so simple, but it really, I grabbed that ball and ran with it.
Yeah, they held space for you. They really just like held space for you to be able to just be with your emotions, be where you were at, be who you were, but maybe you had even not been able to be totally you, like you were just even saying, even before that, maybe.
Yeah.
So what a beautiful community then that birthed you, birth Pixie 2.0 version of Pixie at that moment. I'm sure it's
Yeah.
right in every single experience. There's a growth component. So what would you say in that particular instance? What was the biggest growth component in you and in your life, having experienced grief at that point in your life? It,
A big, I would say, in looking back, that so much faith was cultivated in me. I did not grow up with religious practice in my family. And so this spirit that was in my body and then suddenly wasn't, I felt connected. I felt, I felt like it was something that happened that turned the lights on, and then the lights could never be turned off again. It was an awakening of sorts. And it wasn't this monumental thing that I woke up with one day and was like, oh my gosh, the lights have been turned on. But each time I started to find myself in emotional situations, then I would remember that I had this experience, this sort of light of divinity in a way that was just walking with me, not
Mm.
telling me what to do, not requiring anything of me, just being with me. I felt very not alone because this experience had happened for me. And so, I say that the community were midwives, but it was really grief that birthed me into the person that I am today. Um, and so, cultivating trust in the process of life. Because, of course, when you have a miscarriage, everyone is saying, well, you're young, you can try again. They're saying all these things that are inappropriate, trying to comfort their own discomfort with loss and pain that they're not dealing with, maybe.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. And I think you say that. I think you say that in your intro. Wasn't that like I think you mentioned exactly those words that you just said, that a lot of times what makes people uncomfortable is not your own grief, but it's because it's something within them that they have not been able to to deal with, yeah, to be able to express themselves.
yeah, that's right. So, so with that knowledge that I am here to soothe myself. And how can I do that? And so, through practices of sitting, through healing, through body work and listening and writing and all of these things, I began to understand, oh, Creator gave me the ability to soothe myself, because life will not be in balance. We will not get everything that we want. Things will not always go smoothly, and my reactions to it, which were at the before that, rather limited to shutting down, fighting back, fleeing, cutting and running in a situation that was scary, essentially just not being able to be with myself and be with my feelings. I was self abandoning. And so the process of grief allowed me to stop self abandoning, to just be with what was. And it was every day, it was different. Some days I could get up and walk the dogs, and other days I needed to just be with my journal in my bed, or wait tables at a restaurant, or whatever it was that I felt called to do. I realized that my doing was not the same as my feeling. And
Mm,
so I cultivated, and you experience this when you're going through the rounds in the Prayers of Honoring series, is that we have these different ways of being in these magnificent human bodies. One is our capacity for thinking and ideas. The next is our capacity for action and doing. And um, the next is our capacity for feeling. I like to think of that as being in the west on the compass. And then our
mhm,
capacity for just being. And so I realized that as I started writing and being with myself, I realized everybody wants to skip the west, like we're great for ideas and creative thinking and intellectualizing, and we're great on the ground at taking action. And then when it comes time to feel, I've heard many times people say, "Well, I don't, I'm afraid to open the floodgates because I fear that it will never stop." And I
mm,
heard during my years of being a body worker, I heard people say that so many times. I thought, this is a thing. We really fear our feelings, and we really fear grief. We think it's going to swallow us up. We think it's going to be like quicksand. It's going to drown us. And it really is akin to the waters, of which, makes up our body, makes up our earth. And so I thought, why is this being so rejected? Why is the feelings part being so, not just rejected, ridiculed? And we see this today in our politics. Why is this not cultivated in many people? But probably what we think of first is it's not really cultivated in males. It's rejected in males, or anything that parts of us that are male. And so I just started to really want to spend time, quote, in the waters. And it was a very transformative experience, and it still is. Grief didn't just go away one day. It's not a package that you wrap up and go to the post office with and mail to the North Pole or something, it's
it's not.
with us
Oh,
every day.
I
And
thought that that's what you were gonna hear to come on this call to tell people that they could just like wrap it up and move on with their lives. Quite the opposite. It actually is something we carry. And the aspect of the wheel, which you mentioned here, and I was actually going to read the part of the West here when you were mentioning it, because I'm like looking, I'm like, okay, the West. I just went there. The West invites you. So the way Pixie has written this book is in east, then it's south. Am I right? Hold on. East,
Hmm.
south, west, and then north. And it's in the like that wheel, and you never know when it's gonna go back again, insert
It
again
doesn't
into
always
the
go in a circle.
doesn't always go in a circle. Yeah, there's not particular stage, but those, yeah, but it's there. But so the West invites inward healing. It is often passed over in hurried attempts to sidestep the pain of messy hardships. Just what you were just saying, that it's like we kind of don't want to go there, right? We don't want to go. And the challenge is what it says here, facing ghosts and skeletons in order to gather dissociated fragments and integrate the abandoned contents of the soul.
Mhm.
Oh, and it's so beautiful. And then each prayer, like it's just so beautiful, because I'll just give you guys, the listeners, just a hint here, like a little bit of it. And for example, in this section of the West with grief, it's like honoring trauma, honoring lowlands, honoring us isolation. It's not about like, oh, take it away, please. No, it's honoring where we are in that messy.
Yeah.
That's the beauty, because it's not about pushing it away, it's honoring it, and I love that. So take us then into that, your background, a little bit into your background. You're from the you're and I'm gonna be bad at pronouncing, Choctaw Nation. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah,
Choctaw
Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma.
of Oklahoma. Does your background itself influence a lot of your beliefs? I know you say you're right. You didn't grow up in a very in spirit spiritual. Was it a spiritual home, or was it just not religious? Was it spiritual but not religious, or neither one
It
necessarily?
was it was not religious in my immediate family, but of course my grandparents had been brought up in one or more versions of Christianity. Um, my native family um, were pretty easily Christianized at the time of assimilation in the 1800s, and that definitely trickled down into my family. I like when it comes to spiritual and family matters. I like to say that we didn't get the benefits of a religious practice or spiritual practice, but we got all the like the dregs, the shame of it, like the trickle down into
Oh, watered
into
down
our
version.
the
The
watered down
watered
version.
down.
Yes, which was much to do with shame, and that imprint on my parents definitely came through. So my parents were born in the 50s, and for my dad, who is native, this was a time during Indian Reorganization Act and Relocation Act, and so many natives were being moved out of their territories and reservations and spaces and into the cities. So there's a whole gap generation from the 50s to the 80s that did not learn their languages,
Yes.
did not have any pride around being native. Obviously, I
Or
can't speak
or
for
of
all.
any or of almost any, even the immigrants. My dad grew up Italian, the same. My grandfather never spoke Italian to my dad. That
Yes,
was not something you did. You kind of hid that part of you
it
that was
was.
not necessarily accepted in whatever that was in society at that time.
Yes, blending in was and assimilating was very important.
Mm.
Um, so certainly coming back into, trying to wrap back into my ancestors and my grandparents' indigeneity and the practices of my nation did influence. I've always felt very indigenous, although we only learned a little bit of the language, and I'm still experiencing now, like I'm really understanding how much of that culture, what was left of it, for my grandparents, did come through. So in a very nuanced way, I'm having fun exploring the traditions and tracking them back into, you know ancestral foodways and things like that, total aside. But in terms of grief,
Oh no,
and
food is huge, by the way. Food is a huge link to ancestry. So it's like that's like right. That I think that's a way into back into your ancestry with food
oh
lineage,
yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
big time. So, and so wrapping back into that experience, I'm finding myself, I mean, I'm going to be 50 years old this year as well. A lot can happen between 28 and 49. And so the spiritual influence just keeps probably settling a little bit more into my bones and coming out of my blood memory, and there's room for that to play. And I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of folks are experiencing right now. Um there is a shift away from, it's subtle, it's been rippling through the people for a long time, to not have to move in a straight line with things. I think that these times are calling us to be more fluid, to be more like water, to never to take something and leave what we don't need behind in terms of religion and things, and the difficult lessons that grief teach us and self-abandonment teaches us, and self-betrayal, and some of these kinds of things are spiritual concepts that appear in all of the holy texts, but that are available to us at all times. So it was a very spiritual journey to be with my grief, and then many years later to write about it, and to realize how, there's a wonderful teacher of grief. She's no longer with us, but her name was Sabonfu Some, and she taught grief rituals around the world. She's from Burkina Faso, and was a wonderful, wonderful teacher and mentor. She would say things like, if only the leadership in the world would attend a grief ceremony like this one that we're having, then there would probably not be any war. That many of the greater world's problems are because we have not gone into and been with our pain. We have adapted to it in a way that is very harmful, toxic internally, um, and doesn't serve. But the period that we are living in, that is so industrialized, that put so many people, uprooted them, disrupted their life ways, and put them on different continents, to either dominate or be dominated. There's a lot of trauma that we're holding in our bodies, that came down through the ancestors, and shame, and victimness. And so being with that is very uncomfortable, and yet this is what time is calling us to do, is to be with how the world really is, and not how we want it to be, or how we fantasize like Disneyland it is.
Hmm. And what you're saying right now is very similar to then what you even experienced then in your miscarriage, because when you do sit with the reality, then you allow all these other emotions and memories and traumas or whatever to come through, like even like what happened with your own grief experience, right? Like we need to be present in order to acknowledge everything that's happened to us in the past to come through and allow it to flow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
just
think grief is,
mhm.
is like a scary animal with very sharp teeth for some people. And the truth is that it's your own teeth. Are you going to bite yourself or are you going to be gentle with yourself, with how things really are? We have
Yeah.
that choice, to be
Yeah,
that way.
you,
And
yeah, you said
also,
grief doesn't bite. That's what you wrote here. The grief doesn't bite.
it doesn't
It is,
bite.
it doesn't bite.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that, like, clinical psychologists will say you can titrate. You can utilize, like, you can be a little bit of a gatekeeper for yourself. Like, I'm going to give myself an hour to feel whatever comes up. And then when the hour is over, there's a very Western approach, obviously, but when the
Mhm.
hour is over, I'm going to get up and, make lunch for my family or something like that. um, just to be able to say, okay, I'm feeling, oh, there's a sensation. Oh, that's really uncomfortable. Oh my gosh, that's making me so sad. And then, like, okay, I'm going to let the part of me that's scared of that just, close the gate gently on that. And then we have this wisdom then. Oh, this lives in me. It's there. I can visit it again. I can make priority. I can make time for it. Um, but we're learning how to know ourselves, and there's nothing wrong, with where we're at this place in time. I mean, there is obviously grave harm that has been done by people not feeling their pain, but this is collectively, it is a time for us to um, make safe, um, feeling, make feeling safe.
Mm. I like that you're bringing it back not only to just ourselves, but just as a collective of what's happening, even just in our nation. So it's not just about our individual grief of things that we've had, but back again, so that anybody listening to this could relate to that, to relate to this call. Oh my gosh, I'm like, what is happening with my words? I'm like, blah, blah, blah. I think because I said things before in Spanish, I told you, Catalina's something's happening with my tongue that wants to maybe be in the Spanish mode. Something's off. I'm like, why am I having trouble speaking?
Well,
Um,
and that's that not moving in a straight line anymore. We are beings who are not just in this one language in this one way. I wish we could understand each other better, but
I
for a
wish you could just speak
podcast,
English. Yeah, I could just see the Spanglish that wants to come out in me.
I
That's
love it.
probably what's happening.
Bring
But
it.
no, yeah, yeah. Now that you've read your own book in Spanish, now you can understand it. So no, that aspect of that collective grief that you're sharing, um, and the sitting with it, it is such a healing process. I really have felt that that is something that this year, talking with other people that feel this way too, about as hard as this last year has been as a collective, it also has been beautiful because it has allowed us to see all the areas in which we are hurting as a nation, and that we still have to heal and work through, certain things. So I feel that just as in a personal life, grief allows you to kind of shine a light in other areas of your life. As a collective, I think it's done that as well as a nation.
Yeah. And we
Yeah.
see as a nation what happens when we invalidate feelings, when we skip a place in our critical, learning here on human school or earth school. We see that so much harm can be done and overlooked, and if we're not tending it in ourselves, then we're not going to want to tend it. We're not going to want to create mutual care and mutual aid for others, and
Mhm.
that's being called for right now in a very big way, is to reimagine how we're caring for others. But how can we do that without the trappings of codependence if we're not tending to and caring for ourselves? And it's
Mhm.
beyond self-care. It's beyond a really good smelling bubble bath, although that can be nice. Big fan. um we're going to have to care for these bodies that we're in and realize that the waters, the feelings, the memories, it's all part of us. So do we need to loiter? Do we need to really make a big fuss and a scene about it? If it serves you, okay. If that's not what serves you, then still just, people say, well, when I go to feel my feelings or I feel my grief, what does it actually look like? I mean, this is how
It's different for everybody.
Yes, well, this is how disconnected we are from our feelings. So it can be something like just saying, I feel low today, or I feel a little blue today, or ooh, that little thing made me feel sad for a moment. Like,
Mhm.
our feelings are fluid, so they move in, they move out. We react to things that are coming toward us and things that are in us, and then they move out. That's what tears are such a great example of that. We don't just cry, cry, cry rivers until we're dry. The tears come, and then it's sort of like the rain, the clouds part, it's clear again. It's a very natural process for us to be able to move through feelings. Now, some traumas are very, very, very painful and very complicated and need witnessing. They need space created, by professionals and people who work in mental health and things like that. And so making sure that we have those spaces so that people can tend their grief is so important as well. We have a little grief center here, and Circle works in the prison system, works with individuals. Access is made very doable. Every community needs a hub for grief, so that so that you can be resourced when you're going into this process. The daily grief is something that we can just speak a sentence, I'm not happy that this happened, or that really hit me in a hard way, or that scared me. This is something we're having a really hard time saying in this nation right now, is I'm scared. Um, Meanwhile, it's bubbling and brewing and having its way with us inside. But sometimes just giving it a voice can really help move it through. And other griefs that have been sat on for a very long time, holding the suitcase, sitting on it, and keeping it buckled in, um, we need to get extra help with that.
Yeah, I feel that those, like you said, the suitcase sitting on it, I feel like I always compare it to like a pressure cooker kind of thing. Like you're
Hmm.
just like waiting for it at one point to just like,
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
it's gonna
like
blow.
yeah, blow. And so yeah, I always say you got to let the steam out, right? So I feel that grief is like that. You need to allow it, allow the steam to come out. If not, it will just go, and it will come out in a way that you don't recognize it as grief either, because it
Right.
comes out sometimes way later in life,
Hmm.
and you think you just have anger issues or whatever you want
Hmm.
to call whatever it is that came out, and not realizing that all it was just unattended grief. You even said something about like a little how you compared it to like a house at the beginning in the intro, something like a little house out in the woods, kind of that you don't go and visit. That
Hmm.
you forget to go even to visit. And so
Abuela. Hmm.
yeah, like you need to
Go
go
see
and
the
visit
lady who sweeps,
that.
the woman who throws the bones. You have to, go visit with grief. Make time for her.
Yes, yes, yes. And it really is not that it really is not that scary. It really isn't. I don't know. The more I talk about it, especially in these conversations, the the less scary it is.
I
It
think if
really
it
is.
surprises folks, if they're in a clinical therapeutic process, or they become triggered by something a partner does or says, or, things that happen even in the political world can be very triggering. It reminds us, it opens up these spaces that remember, oh, that something happened to me that really, really, really hurt. And I'm scared, I'm sad, I feel like I'm going to be wrecked. And it can be very disruptive when it surprises you.
Mm,
um, I think it can, that's what I think surprises or scares folks when they say, I'm afraid to open the flood. If the floodgate is opened, I'm afraid I'm never going to be able to get the gate back down on that, put the dam back up. But it's not been my experience, even with these, the seriously, severely traumatized. It has not been my experience or witnessing, limited though it is, that it works that way. It comes in, we can sip it a little bit, it doesn't just come drowning us. um
I I agree. I agree. I feel that it's just that you say ebb and flows. I've compared it myself with like the ocean. It's just like
mhm,
waves in and out. You don't know what it is, but they're manageable.
mhm.
And yeah, some of them might just tumble you down. And I think the most important is having the tools in order to be able to navigate your grief. You even say you're kind of like like you're the one rowing this boat, kind of when people are in this, like you're kind of like the guide with this book, in your prayers of honor. I keep on referring to the book because I'm holding it, but um, you are just taking people into this journey, into their own grief journey, but they have to still be there to row, right? You still have to kind of be there, but you can have that tool in order to navigate that, whether it's journaling, these journal prompts, writing, having a community, like you mentioned before, when you experience your own grief. What other tools have you found that have been helpful in the different grief journeys you've had?
I mean, self-talk for me is very important. I have to have a gentler voice with myself than the one I had, many, many years ago. Um, because we live in a culture that um, relies on dominance and submission. This is sort of how we motivate ourselves and get ourselves to do things. We say rough things like pull it together, or you know stop crying, or stop wasting time, and things like that. So as we get older, I think that it maybe can become, the invitation is to become a little bit more curious, a little bit more gentle. We're reparenting ourselves in a way. And so how we think differently about how to raise children these days than we did 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and so I sometimes, if I'm speaking harshly to myself, I'll say, would you say that to your daughter or your son? Is that the way, how would you say that for the outcome that you're wanting to see happen? If you're wanting them to feel supported, if you're wanting them to stay open and stay well, how would you say that? So I'm learning to talk to myself differently. I'm also learning not to feel ashamed about telling people about it. I'm finding probably the most empowering for me is just finding language around my grief.
Mm.
What is it like? Is it like a river today? Is it like an ocean? Is it like a sprinkle of rain? Is it, like a boggy puddle? Just finding ways to say, oh, I am in my body. It is like this. Um,
Mm.
and then being with it that way. Oh, I'm like a hurricane today, I'm just ratcheted up and cleaning my house in a frenzy. I think I'm avoiding something. I need I need help, but I don't know how to ask for it. I'm stuck or whatever. Just what is the truth in this moment? How is it? And then eventually it shifts, it moves. That is the only constant, is change, right?
Mhm.
Our fear of expecting it to always be this way keeps us in a kind of trap.
That is so that is a good way of saying, because it's not I don't know why we expect things to stay the same when we know they never are, right? Life is always changing. Yet you're right, like when we want those things to continue the same, um then it's like expectation hangover, or like we let ourselves down because of things we thought that we're gonna be a certain way, or things like, you know what I mean? Like we make the grief be what it is, not the situation itself. It's our own ideas about what was gonna be
That's
that
exactly
makes it.
right. Yeah, and we
It's
were not made to be patient. Patience is not built into us. So if we have to revisit the same pain or the same lesson, 4 or 5 times or more, then we're just like, I thought I was over this. Like, why am I still suffering in this same way? And we punish ourselves cruelly for having to revisit the same lesson. And we know it is like a spiral, it is like an onion, it is like something that comes around and teaches us again and again. And this is, our pain, our experiences, our loops, feedback loops. Every time we come into contact with it, we have the opportunity to react in a different way. But we're so results oriented in this culture. We want to do whatever it's going to take to make it go away. And that we can't be thinking like that. Like, whatever it's going to take for us to be in better relationship with it, you know?
I love what you just said. It's feedback. It's feedback because it shows us either where you are now, because are you going to make a different choice this time when this presents itself
Mhm.
again? Or have you grown from that experience before, that now when it comes back up again, are you going to react or differently than you did before? So it's definitely, yeah, I like that word feedback that you just said. It's lets you know where you are in your growth by depending on how it is you reacted in that moment.
Yeah.
Uh
We
how much
played
you've grown from that. Uh-huh.
Did you play with those little basket tubes that you could put your fingers in, like I think they used to call it Chinese finger trap. You would put your fingers in it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
On both
Yes.
ends that were like woven, bamboo
Mhm.
woven
And you try
kind
to
of thing.
pull it out and it gets stuck, and the only thing that gets you unstuck is relaxing right into it.
Mhm.
It's so similar with our emotions. We can get tight. We can get really, really, really tight. Um, and then, ourselves, our families, our relationships, you know, do not thrive when we are getting tighter and tighter because we're refusing to be with ourselves in the way that we are. It's not, grief and feelings are not tidy, they're not linear. And this, as we become more in better relationship with grief and feelings, I think we become much more reacquainted with, the qualities of womb that is life-giving and is of value. We have, when we devalued women, when we devalued mothers, grandmothers, when we devalued elders, we did ourselves a great disservice as a human, as humans, because we just sort of cut that part out of the equation because it was too mysterious, too messy, too bloody, too emotional, So obviously we have psychology and clinical medicine that says, oh, this is a sign, these are signs of hysteria, these are signs of madness, and we're going for sanism here. And I think that is very, very detrimental. People fear not being well with their feelings so much that they just tied it off in a knot, and now it's just, building up in there. So as you said, letting the pressure
Cooker.
letting it kind of just come down a little bit, being with ourselves is it it's I know that we're moving into this, and I have seen people relaxing themselves in the trap of fear of feelings for at least, gosh, probably close to 20 years. And as I start to feel my community being better surfers, riding the waves of what comes up without having expectations for it to just be this one way. I'm seeing a lot of change. We are seeing a lot of change at a national level, and I think that seeing things how they really are, being with things how they really are, feeling into our feelings is having a role on that stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the being honest. If we're not honest to how it is we're feeling, we can't move forward. We can't grow from it unless we're honest with how it is we're feeling as an individual and as a nation. We can't move forward unless we're honest with where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that is absolutely true. Oh, Pixie, it's been a pleasure talking with you in my jumbled jergo. I don't know what it is. What happened today with my
I
with
don't
my
know.
thought
Let's
process
just
here?
go with it. I mean, I think that
I
that's what
know.
grief and feelings do. We're
Yeah,
not in the East with our brains on straight. We're in
we're
our
not. It
feelings, which are
is
fluid.
at all. And you know what is so funny? I rarely end up listening back again to my interviews. I only hear them just to be able to get the little, blurb of whatever it is I'm going to use for the intro, like as a little teaser. Because if I did, I would be over analyzing. Oh my goodness, I did this, I said that, and that judgment component comes in. So I'm like, oh, whatever. Like you said, this was the day of the tongue twisted Kendra voice here. And
Yeah.
that's just the reality. Just like some days, like we're talking with grief, some days my grief will just be right on my shoulder, right out there in my emotions. Other times it's not. So
Yeah.
same thing today. But thank you for going with this wave, riding
Yes.
this wave.
Well, we know the magic happens in the conversation, This is
Yes,
what we
yeah.
know.
Thank you so much. Now, to be able to get your books, do they go to your website? What's the best way for somebody to access the pixielighthorse.com?
Yep, PixieLighthorse.com has sales pages on every book, and they can be ordered and shipped by my team here. They're also available in PDF. And what else did I want to say? Oh, wholesale orders. Many stores, boutiques, retailers, yoga studios, things like that carry books. They're half price, and so you would use the wholesale ordering form on the website. So they're available a whole bunch of different ways. Of course, they're at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Walmart and things like that as well. So
Perfect.
pretty
Thank you
easy access.
so much. It's been a pleasure having you and learning from you. And now I'm like, all my highlighted things I wanted to mention of the book. That's why I think I was so lost, because I'm like, wait, I want to ask about this part. And then but then I'm like, wait, but I also want to pay attention to what it is she's talking
To
about.
that salad she's tossing.
So, so anyway, thank you once
Oh,
again,
thank
Pixie.
Thank you, Kendra, so much for having me. It's such an honor, and I really appreciate your relationship to Catalina. And maybe we'll do a part 2 someday if folks want to hear more.
Yes, that'd be great.
Save your questions.
In a day that I'm not like. Blah, 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 blah.
You are
Thank you
great.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.